Greetings from Mesa View United Methodist Church of Albuquerque, New Mexico. We hope this message will be meaningful and relevant to your life and your relationship with God. We invite you to join us for worship on Sunday mornings. Our traditional service is at 8:30 a.m. and at 11 a.m. we gather for contemporary worship. More information may be found at our website, mesaviewumc.com. Now may you be blessed through the reading and hearing of God's holy word.
Our Hebrew scripture from today is Zephaniah 1:1 and 3:14 through 20. The word of the Lord that came to Zephaniah, son of Cushi, son of Gedaliah, son of Amariah, son of Hezekiah, in the days of King Josiah, son of Ammon of Judah. Sing aloud, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O Israel. Rejoice and exult with all your heart, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Lord has taken away the judgments against you. He has turned away your enemies. The King of Israel, the Lord, is in your midst. You shall fear disaster no more. On that day it shall be said to Jerusalem, do not fear, O Zion. Do not let your hands grow weak. The Lord, your God, is in your midst, a warrior who gives victory. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will renew you in his love. He will exult over you with loud singing, as on the day of festival. I will remove disaster from you, so that you will not bear reproach for it. I will deal with all of your oppressors at that time, and I will save the lame and gather the outcast, and I will change their shame into praise and renown in all the earth. At that time I will bring you home, at the time when I gather you, for I will make you renowned and praised among all the peoples of the earth, when I restore your fortunes before your eyes, says the Lord. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
In Star Wars Rogue One, the lead female character, Jyn Erso, says about the rebellion, we have hope. Rebellions are built on hope. Of course, all of us Star Wars geeks knew that all along, even though it was never said, because the original Star Wars movie was renamed Star Wars A New Hope. But that was the first time that word about hope in the future had ever been mentioned. If they didn't have hope in the future, why would you join the rebellion? Why would you do anything to challenge the empire? Why would you do anything that could risk your life? Why would you do anything that goes above and beyond, this bigger than you are, if you didn't have hope? What would be the points in that? If there was no hope, why do anything? Why not just slink back into the word work, just keep on keeping on, hoping to live the next day and one more day beyond that, day after day? If there was no sense that things would ever get better, if there's no sense that things can't get better, then there's no need to do anything about it. No sense of having any hope for the future. Thus, saying that rebellions are built on hope says not only that things can but must get better in the future. That there is something better out there, even if we can't see it, even if it seems impossible at the moment, there's something better that we're striving for. Of course, long before we had the wisdom of George Lucas, we also heard a very similar thing from Paul in his letter to the Romans. He says, I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but of the will of the one who subjected it, and hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For in hope we were saved. Now, hope that is not seen is not hope, for who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. That's part of the message we get from Zephaniah in that passage that we heard this morning, that not only is he making a proclamation that Judah and the surrounding nations will be destroyed by God, but he closes with this remarkable section in chapter 3 about God and God's message of hope for us. Now we're told that Zephaniah's prophetic career takes place under the reign of King Josiah, whose reign is from 640 to 609 BCE. It's important to note right away that King Josiah is known as the great reformer in Israelite history. He is considered the most important king, second only to King David. In his prophecy, Zephaniah has specific knowledge that he gives us about Jerusalem, including naming some of the neighborhoods in the city. And he also seems to have some intimate knowledge of the workings, not just of the temple, but also of the political establishment of Judah of the time, leading to many to believe that he's a member of the inner courts. He's one who belongs at the upper echelon of Judean society. We can also get this from the first verse of his genealogy, which gives us some fairly important and interesting information if you're knowing what to be looking for. The first is that his genealogy dates back 4 generations. This is very unique. Most genealogies for the prophets only go back 1 or 2 generations. So if it's going back farther than that, then we should pay attention to the last name that's given. In this case is Hezekiah. More than likely is King Hezekiah, who was the second great reformer outside of Josiah. So there's an emphasis here to make sure that we know he has some relation to this king in the Davidic line of Judah. But the other big piece to know about Zephaniah comes from who is said is his father, which is Cushi. Cushi in Hebrew means African. So Zephaniah mentions Ethiopia. The Hebrew word that's translated for Ethiopia there is Cushi. And so they're wanting us to know that Cushi, or he probably is African. He's the son of Africa. So now that could be a possibility why they're wanting to make a connection back to King Hezekiah, is to give some sense of identity that he belongs in this community, that he is not an outsider who's come in to disrupt and say bad things about Judean culture. That he has connections that go deep into the hearts of Judaism. And so they make this link then to King Hezekiah. How successful that was at the time, we don't really know. But the one thing we should keep in mind is not to put our own things that we deal with race in our culture back to the 6th century BCE of Judah. That their attitudes and history on this are radically different than ours. Judaism and Christianity in the early days had strong connections with Africa, with Ethiopia in particular, and none of that had anything to do with racial characteristics or believing that one side was greater or better than another. But this does give us some information about Zephaniah that we don't know about any of the other minor prophets. But as I said, it's not possibly just the fact that he's an outsider, that he's Africa, that could cause Zephaniah some problems, but it's the message that he has to deliver. He uses typical prophetic language about the judgment that's being made against Judah and those nations surround them. But his message harkens back more to that of Hosea, what we did right at the beginning of this sermon series on the 12 minor prophets. And Hosea, who claimed the destruction that was coming was not because of injustice that was taking place in the society, which is what we've heard from the other minor prophets, but instead about the breaking of the covenantal relationship with God. That they are worshiping other gods, they're practicing synchronistic things, that is taking the things of the culture and trying to incorporate them into others. Oh, so we're not really worshiping this other God. It's still our God that we're worshiping, but we're just taking their idols. In Zephaniah saying, no, you can't be doing that. It's not that injustice isn't taking place. He calls the leaders of Judah ravenous wolves. So there's injustice, but the biggest thing that he's going to make a judgment, or God is going to make a judgment about, is the fact that they've broken covenants. But like Hosea says, you've forgotten that God led you out of Egypt and slavery, that God led you into the promised land, that God led you into conquest over other nations. You've forgotten what God has done for you. In fact, Zephaniah says he's addressing this to those who say in their hearts, the Lord will not do good, nor will he do harm. That is, people saying, sure, God might exist, but God's not actually doing anything in the world. God's just sort of out there. And God's certainly not going to punish us for what we do. So God, through Zephaniah, is basically saying, nope, that's not the way it works. He says the day of the Lord is coming. Now, we talked about this idea of the day of the Lord several times. And a reminder that originally the Israelites thought that the day of the Lord was a time in which all the other nations would be judged and punished, and Israel and Judah would be restored to their rightful place in the world, be lifted up by God and put at the top, and everyone else would be subservient to them. But that type of thinking can lead to lots of problems, a sense of tribalism and nationalism that says we're good and they're bad. God is on our side, that our enemies are God's enemies. But what the prophets say is that's not the way it works. That God will judge the other nations, but that God will judge Israel and Judah as well. And that he will hold them up to a higher standard because they know what God requires of them as people and as a nation. And so like others, Zephaniah says, Judah will be destroyed because they have been worshiping other gods. They have not been faithful to the covenantal relationship that they have made with God. And so the great day of the Lord is near, a day in which God says, I will search through Jerusalem with lamps. That is, no one can escape God's judgments. Now, as I said, King Josiah is known for his reformations that he undertakes in Judaism to try and purify, to bring it back to the biblical roots of the faith. He is probably assisted in this, or at least pushed into it, by these proclamations of Zephaniah about the coming destruction. And so Josiah orders a renovation done of the temple, and while they're doing that, they find a book. It's either rediscovered or it's written at the time, depending on which scholar you're listening to, that we believe is the book of Deuteronomy. And so Josiah undertakes what are known as the Deuteronomical reforms. And so he wants to return Judaism to being a true monotheistic religion, worshiping one God, practicing kosher laws, following all the laws that are given to them so that they're in right alignment with God. Now, since a majority of scholars believe that the Judaism that we know today really comes out of the exile in Babylon, which happened 17 years after Josiah's death, the idea of a true monotheism and practicing circumcision and kosher laws doesn't really come into fruition where everyone is doing it until the Babylonian exile. We can't underestimate the importance of what Josiah does, that without this reform, it's possible they may have just disappeared to the winds the way the 10 northern tribes did when they were taken into exile by the Assyrians. That Josiah is the one who forms this people into Judaism that we know today. And Zephaniah is the one who pushes them back into that place. But after Josiah dies in battle, the other kings return back to their wicked ways, if you're reading Kings and Chronicles, and they begin worshiping other gods and doing all the things God's told them not to do. And so Judah is destroyed by what Zephaniah and the other minor prophets say is a warrior God who puts people to shame because of all the deeds which they have rebelled against God. Now, in his book Joshua, Joseph Gerzon tells the story of a carpenter, an unknown carpenter, who comes into a small town as like a Christ-like figure. And the two churches in town, I don't remember exactly what denominations are, but we'll say one is Baptist and one is Methodist, just for the sake of argument. They commissioned this carpenter, Joshua, to carve figures of Jesus for their entryway to their church. And the Methodist church asked for a figure of Jesus, as shepherd, kneeling down with sheep around him and beckoning the children to come forth, because their idea and their understanding and what they talk about God is this God of love and comforts. And the Baptist church commissions him to make an image of Jesus turning over the tables of the money changers in the temple, because the image of God that they hold on to and talk the most about is an avenging, angry God. And so Joshua accepts both of these commissions, and when he's finished with them, he delivers them to the opposite church that ordered them. And those churches complain that this is not what they asked for, and they want the image of Jesus that they had requested, that they had ordered and paid for. And Jesus tells them that these are the carvings they get because these are the carvings they need. Because they have to have the other side of God in order to understand God. That you can't have the anger of God without the love of God. And you can't have the love of God without the anger of God. Because anger is not the opposite of love. The opposite of love is apathy. So an angry God says that God cares. That God gets upset about what it is that we're doing for us. God cares about what's going on in our lives and how we're interacting with each other. If God didn't care, he wouldn't get upset about us. We get angry about the things that hurt us the most or affect us the most. I get much more angry about what things the Yankees do that I think are stupid than the stupid thing the Red Sox do. I'm happy with the stupid things the Red Sox do. Right? We get angry about the things we care about. And so when we hear about the anger of God and the prophets, we should understand that as showing God's love. As troubling as these images are, this idea of a warrior God, it's happening because God so loves the world. And so the prophets give us the dreams and the visions of God. They show us the way the world should be. They communicate the anger and disappointment of God, not for who we are, but for what we do. Because we're not following God's will for the world. And God doesn't get angry just to get angry. God gets angry at how we treat one another, even how we treat ourselves. And so the prophets give us and Judah and the world a wake-up call about a different way of living and being. They try to give us accounts of God's love and compassion alongside these visions of judgment. Because the love and compassion says that no matter how far we go astray, that God's still there. And that God's hope for us and for the future is still there. That we are never alone. That sometime everything will be brought right, even if it doesn't seem to be the case in the moment. And that's where the message of hope that Zephaniah brings is so important. Because, as Paul says, we don't need hope when things are going well. Who hopes for what is seen? We need it when things are trouble. And so Zephaniah's message of hope cannot be separated from his message of judgments. Because they're inherently linked. You can't have pardon without judgment. It's this message of hope that reveals ultimately the nature of God. Because God pulls back his judgment against Judah. Because ultimately there is then forgiveness. And there is joy. And there is hope. Not just hope proclaimed, but hope fulfilled. And a people celebrates, Zephaniah says, and God is in the midst of this celebration. That God is in this party. It's God's voice who's singing loudly over the people. It is God who saves the lame and the outcast, who gathers together those who are told they don't belong, who gathers together the humble and the faithful, and who saves and renews us in God's love, Zephaniah says. Now, this passage is called to be read twice during the year. The first time is during the season of Advent, 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, a time patterned after Lent, a time of preparation, a time of prayer and fasting to get ready for the celebration of Christmas. And the second time this passage is read normally is during the Easter Vigil, the Saturday before Easter, the last day of Lent, that time of preparation, time of prayer and fasting to help us prepare for the celebration of Easter. It is that sense that even in the darkness, that hope is there, and that hope is necessary, and that we cling to it not just to get us through these moments, but to give us a reason to get through these moments. The playwright Tracy Letts wrote, "Thank God we can't know the future or we'd never get out of bed." And I can understand that sentiment, but it's one I disagree. Because we do know the future. And it's a future of hope, that God wins. It's one of hope and it's one of joy. But what's true of hope and joy is that they're not dependent upon what's happening to us right now. We can have hope and joy in times of happiness, and we can have hope and joy in times of despair. Because they're not dependent upon us. The theologian Henry Nouwen, describing the difference between joy and happiness, says, while happiness is dependent upon external condition, joy is the experience of knowing that you are unconditionally loved, and that nothing, sickness, failure, emotional distress, oppression, war, or even death, can take that love away. Thus, joy can be present even in the midst of death. Hope can be present even in the midst of death, because God is present in the midst of these things. So if resistance is dependent upon hope, so too is faith dependent upon hope. And yet God's presence and God's promises go even deeper than that. Because while faith, hope, and love may abide, as Paul says, sometimes in our lives, even faith and hope go away. But what remains is love. Because God is love. And God is always there, and God rejoices over us. And God renews us in his love. Each of us are given God's love every moment of every day. Even when we go astray, God's love is there. God's hope is there. And in that, we too should celebrate. We should sing aloud and rejoice and exult with all of our hearts. And in that, we should learn not to fear, for the Lord our God is in our midst. I pray that we will know it is so, my brothers and sisters.